Malinali, in the body of this unified woman, saw herself surrounded by 12 moons and held up by the antlers of the 13th one. With her hands, she picked up prayers and pieces of pain that she made into roses. Later, she felt the moon underneath her feet completely afire, and the flames devoured her thoughts. Her mind was ablaze that created images that nailed themselves into the hearts of men like blades of fire, as they spoke to them of the true meaning of language. When Malinali felt that the moon, now beside her, was completely ablaze, she opened her eyes. There were tears there, and in her heart a premonition of flowers. Malinali was this, reflection of a reflection. The light of the moon fell at her back, and the lengthening shadow that left her body covered a great part of the distance that separated her from the stone of the sun, located in the great temple of Tenochtitlan. Malinali had decided to go out in the middle of the night to stroll in the plaza in silence, without having to translate or interpret, without having to feign indifference before the gods of her ancestors, so that she would not be marked an idolater. They had arrived in Tenochtitlan the day before, and Malinali had been as impressed as the Spaniards, if not more so, with the great city's beauty. The great temple was the center. It was the place that reflected the vision of the universe of its founders. From that place originated great avenues toward the 4 cardinal points. There, standing before the stone of the sun, Malinali was at the exact center of the city, the universe. The sun, the moon, she herself, and the stone of the sun created all that was unique and indivisible, and at that moment she understood that the stone was an image of the invisible, that it was a circle that represented not only the sun and the winds, the forces of creation, but the invisible at its center. For the first time, she saw the invisible, and she understood that time was something different than what she had thought. She was used to understanding the passing of time through the movement of the stars in the skies, through the cycles of sowing and reaping, of life and death. When she sowed, she could also understand time. A beautiful wipil was proof of time inverted, of the way that time is interwoven. In each embroidery, Malinali gave her time to others and shared with them beauty. It had been a long time since she had time to sew, much less embroider. Her life alongside the Spaniards had changed her concept of time completely. Now she measured it by the days of the march, by the number of words translated, by the number of intrigues and strategies developed. Her experience of time seemed to have been accelerated, and it did not leave her a single free moment to place herself at the center of knowledge. It was a confusing time, in which her time and Cortez's time were ineluctably interconnected, laced, tied together. It was as if through a native costume, in a traditional ceremony, someone had tied the ends of their vestments together and made them man and wife. It was an uneasy feeling. Feeling tied down stole her freedom. She wanted to go one way, and Cortez veered toward the other. It was an enforced union that she had not decided on, but that seemed to mark her always. Her time was, without fail, now interwoven with Cortez's time. But that night, before the stone of the sun, Malinali felt balanced, restored, at one with time or even better, outside of it. That night, Montezuma also reflected on the concept of time, his time, and the cycle that was ending. Like Malinali, he could not sleep. He went out to the palace balcony and from there watched a resplendent woman dressed in white who was crossing the plaza. His heart jumped. She looked like Siwakwat, the sixth disastrous omen, who appeared at night and wandered through the streets of the great city, weeping and letting out great yelps for her children. Moreover, he very clearly heard a voice that said, "My little ones, we must flee. Where will I take you so sorrow cannot reach us?" He felt goosebumps. The sight left him frozen. He wanted to move but could not. He tried to calm down, to rein in his thoughts, but they did nothing but lead him to images of misfortune. Not exactly sure why, he thought of the strange bird with a mirror in its head that years before some fisherman had brought to the palace. The finding of the bird was the last of the ill omens. As soon as Montezuma looked at the bird, it disappeared from his sight. He tried to remember what was reflected, and in place of the memory, a tremendously painful image came to his mind, of a heavy rain falling on the stone of the sun, and each drop of rain that fell on the stone wore it down, leaving it completely smooth. Montezuma then understood that death was everything that had no meaning and could not be measured, and he shuddered. His time had definitely ended, and he feared for the future of his children, especially the younger ones, Tecuichpo, who was 9, and Axayacat, who was 7. Extending this strange game of mirrors, Malinali's fear for her children reflected that of Montezuma, with the difference that she had yet to have them. It was a night of magic, of light, of peace before the war. Malinali returned to this world on hearing the splashing of fish that were jumping in the canal surrounding the great plaza. With each jump, they made a sound similar to a stone falling into the water, but the noise of the fish was more delicate, continuous, and calming. Fish jumped on a night of the full moon because of the light. Thanks to the brilliance of the moon reflected in the water, the fish could see the insects flittering on its surface and jumped up to devour them. Malinali expected that in the same manner, Tlazolteotl, the devourer of filth, would eat up her sins, or what she thought of as sins, which were nothing more than nonconformity, misfortune, and a series of contrary feelings. Immediately she went into the temple of Huitzilopochtli, god of war, a place where she knew she could find the goddess, for Tlazolteotl didn't have a temple of her own. She was a lunar deity, the goddess of passionate love, of those who unleashed lust and broke the laws against adultery. She was also the great pregnant mother, the patron saint of birds, of medicines, and steam baths that cleanse and purify more than the body. This goddess was feared, for just as easily as she set on passion and sexual appetite, she could take them away or cause venereal diseases. To prevent all of this, if you committed a sexual transgression, it was necessary to confess to one of the goddess's priests, who in her name received the filth and mandated a penance that could be anything from a simple 4-day fast to the perforation of the tongue with an agave thorn. Since the fast had to take place during the 4 days preceding the celebration of the Chihuateteos, the feminine deities that had died during childbirth, and this date had already passed, Malinali decided on her own that the punishment that befitted her case was perforation of the tongue. Of course, she didn't confess to any priest. She couldn't, for Cortés had not approved it. And she immediately realized that he would not approve of having her tongue perforated. What excuse could she give the day after when she couldn't talk? There had to be another way for her to punish herself, but she couldn't find it. She felt dirty, sinful. She longed to cleanse her soul. So that she wouldn't be seen, she had gone looking for relief at that hour of night.